Friends, you may be seated. Officiating today's service will be Rabbi Nate Crane and Cantor Pavel Reutman of Beth Hillel B'nai Emunah.
Each generation faces loss with longing, sadness, gratitude, and a yearning. The generations who came before us found comfort in the words of our tradition, in the words of our biblical poetry. We begin our service this morning in memory of our dear and so sincerely cared for Dr. Howard Rice, the words of our Psalms. The cantor will lead us first in the Hebrew, following which we'll join together in the English of the 23rd Psalm on the inside of our pamphlet.
Adonai Roi Lo Echsar B'nad Sheyarbitzeni Alamei Menuchot Inachaleni Nafshi Yeshavev Yanecheni v'maglei tzedek Yanecheni v'maglei tzedek Leman Shemo Gam ki elech Begeit Salmavet Lo Yerara Ki Ata Imari Shiftecha Umishantecha Pema Yenachamoni Taroch lefanai shulchan neged sorerai Gishanta vashemen roshi kosi rebaya Achtov vachesed Yerdefoni Kol Yimei Hayai Kol Yimei Hayai V'shavti B'veit Adonai Le'orech Yamim Adonai Roi Lo Echsar Adonai Roi Lo Echsar.
We'll join together in the English. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. A reading from the book of Job, from which Howard could quote by memory. Talmid chacham mimevi lanu tmurato, ki yesh la kesef motza makom lazahav yazku. There is no replacing a person of wisdom. There are mines for silver and places where gold is refined. Iron is taken from the earth and copper is smelted from the rock. But where can wisdom be found? And where is the source of understanding? There is no replacing a person of wisdom. We could never, ever replace our source of wisdom, Dr. Howard Rice. L'kol zman ve'et l'chol chefetz tachat hashamayim, et laledet ve'et lamut, et lata'at ve'et la'akor natua. To everything there is a season, Ecclesiastes teaches, and a time for every purpose under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to slay and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to cry and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time for solitude, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to discard, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time for silence and a time to speak. It is now that we have come to our time for speaking, a time in which we call Howard's memory to memory. We call his memory to our hearts and the forefront of our minds. So we'll hear from a number of Howard's grandchildren, as well as from Rabbi Alan Kensky. We'll begin with Rabbi Kensky.
I join with all of you this morning in mourning the passing of Dr. Howard Rice, an extraordinary human being, an outstanding physician, the loving patriarch of his family, and a deeply loyal and religious Jew. There is a verse that immediately came to mind as I thought about Howard, the famous verse from the prophet Micah, where the prophet exclaims, "He has told you, O man, what is good and what the Lord requires of you, only to do justice, asot mishpat, to love goodness, ahavat chesed, and to walk modestly with your God. V'hatznei lechet im Elohecha." The last part of this verse, for me, captures so much of our beloved Howard. Walk modestly with your God. Howard was one who walked modestly, a man of great accomplishment, held in the highest esteem by his colleagues, revered by his patients and their families. Howard always conducted himself with humility and never boasted of his achievements. Howard was a religious man in the truest sense of that word. At the center was his faith in God, expressed through prayer and a life of mitzvot. Howard was a stalwart of our daily minyan and led us in prayer on many an occasion, most notably on Wednesday mornings. When it was his turn to daven, he never missed a beat. If it was a special day on the liturgical calendar, I, as rabbi, did not need to tell him what changes to make in the service. He had it prepared and figured it out, and he knew his way totally through the prayer book. Howard loved the daily minyan, and he expressed his appreciation to the minyanaires and congregation in many ways. For years, it was his pleasure to sponsor the expanded breakfast on the morning before Passover, after the Siyum on the fast of the firstborn. Howard had great respect for all his rabbis and teachers. He credited Rabbi Harold Stern for having taught him so much of what he knew about Judaism and for inspiring him to deepen his religious life. Howard was continually expanding his Jewish knowledge. He was a regular student in our adult education classes, and he was always reading. As he shared with me just a few weeks ago, he felt blessed by the teachings and learning from all the rabbis of the congregation. It was one of the many things that Howard felt grateful for in his life. In his own distinctive and modest way, Howard practiced loving kindness, the chesed, the goodness that the prophet Micah spoke of in the verse with which I began. I will never forget how Howard, along with Jean, donated and dedicated a block of prayer books to the synagogue after the passing of my late wife and of each of my parents. To this day, I am comforted whenever I am in the synagogue and can pray while holding a prayer book with the names of my late wife, mother, and father. I share this very personal story of Howard's chesed, of his loving kindness with you, knowing very well that Howard's life was full of countless deeds of loving kindness, such as this one. Howard's life was a true blessing. In his work, he sustained many lives and healed many children. He taught physicians. He was a devoted and loving husband, father, grandfather, and great-grandfather. He taught his family values and modeled loyalty to faith and tradition. He was grateful for the blessings of his life, for his loving wife and family. He taught you how to live, and he even taught you how to die. May the soul of Howard Rice, Tzvi Ben Natan, be bound in the bond of eternal life. Tehi nishmato tzrura b'tzror hachayim. Amen.
It's now that we will hear from Howard's grandchildren, Joel, Micah, Rachel, and Josh.
My grandfather lived a life to be proud of, a role model to us all in so many ways. He was an extremely dedicated husband, loving father of 4, dedicated grandfather to 7, and a proud great-grandfather as well. A majority of our memories with Grandpa center around Shabbat and holidays. Friday nights and holidays meant meals together as a family. Everyone would come in, and immediately Grandpa asked for his shots. He walked around, arranging people and taking pictures of people who were not at all prepared, but he needed to make sure that he had a picture of every person there and to truly capture the togetherness of every family gathering. When the prayer started with Shalom Aleichem, Grandpa would sing off-key and slightly slower than everyone else, always adding an exclamation to El Yahon, just for dramatic effect. He'd bless the kids in Hebrew and English, exclaiming that it was too much to bless each kid individually. He then read Eshet Chayil for Grandma and then a blessing of peace for the family. He would wash his hands and say the blessing out loud in unison with Grandma. Then for Challah, we'd have his favorite 12 tribes that we could pull apart. He was sadder than anyone else when Breadsmith closed. When it was time for soup, there was no doubt that he would have soup with 2 matzo balls and extra carrots, served to him last so he didn't finish before everyone else was even ready to begin.
Our family was truly centered around those meals. We are so lucky that so many of us were able to share a Friday night dinner with him in these last few weeks. Every meal with Grandpa, not just Shabbat, would start with a big bowl of soup, and he would end every meal possible he could with dessert, preferably ice cream, and preferably multiple scoops of multiple flavors. After Grandpa's diagnosis and first treatment, we cousins sent him some ice cream to ease the pain. He called each of us individually to thank us. We all wish we could have thanked him more, so he knew how much we loved him.
While food was a big passion of our grandfather's, he had so many more that he loved to share with us. I want to share this memory from my brother Ben that brings so many of his passions together. The last time Ben saw him a few weeks ago, he got to meet Sophie, his great-granddaughter. Ben got to hear his doctor voice come out again as Nikki, Ben's wife, got lectured about their dog, Murphy, licking Sophie's face. It reminded him of all the Shabbat dinners we had when we were younger. Myself and Grandpa, we would build a new wooden train track for Ben, and Grandpa and I liked to do the engineering, and Ben would push the train around on the track. Then he would read us a story and fall asleep in the middle of it. Seemingly, not just at the end of a paragraph or the end of a sentence, sometimes even mid-word, he would fall asleep. So we would poke him, Grandpa, keep reading, and then, oh yeah, and then we continue on. More often than not, Grandma and Grandpa would be getting back from one of their many trips around the world. They did love to travel, and they went on so many beautiful trips, which meant that Ben and I always got a token when they came back. I have a vast collection of dolls from all over the world, and Ben would get all sorts of interesting toys, landmark models, and he has a set of Russian stacking dolls painted to look like the Chicago Cubs.
Grandpa had a deep appreciation for music, whether listening to classical CDs at home, picking up the piano again after he retired, or attending the orchestra. When Ben started playing stand-up bass, Grandpa happily took him to an orchestra performance. Josh was brought to the Skokie Library to hear what a trumpet sounded like in a jazz band. Grandpa attended the middle school musical where Micah played saxophone in the band. And Grandpa spent hours watching and listening to Asher play guitar over Zoom. While Asher lived on the other side of the country from Grandma and Grandpa, being able to share his love for music with Grandpa, even online, grew their bond and love for each other. Grandpa deeply valued learning and education, and he loved hearing about what we grandkids were studying in school, always asking about our classes, and he even visited 4 of us on campus so he could see it all in action. He supported our passions and attended every sports game, gymnastics practice, musical performance, academic ceremony, and graduation event that he could, whether in Buffalo Grove, Skokie, Richmond, California, and Boston. He even put on one of Grandma's hats for a Zoom tea party with Eviana just to make us all smile. No matter where we were in the world, he put in the work to keep our family together, bringing us all to Skokie to the house for family celebrations and reunions, bringing Ben and Rachel to visit us in Richmond, and even sending me and Josh to Boston to visit Asher and Eviana. It is through his efforts that our family could come together and remain together. Over the last 10 years, I have had the pleasure of helping my grandparents make an annual photo book to capture their travels and memories. It began with going through their pictures to put together a slideshow for their 50th anniversary 15 years ago, and has continued until now. I have loved looking at the pictures, hearing the stories, and learning more about the adventures they have had. When Grandma and I needed help writing the captions, Grandpa always claimed he didn't remember the people or the places in the pictures, but a second later he could name every person and give you the history of every location. His memory was strong and filled with incredible stories. While he didn't always express his love and his pride in words, his actions spoke volume. He always picked out mushy birthday cards filled with meaningful and sentimental phrases. He showed up and supported us when we need him. He was a strong, caring, and thoughtful man that we are all honored to know and call our grandfather.
Growing up, living so close together, Grandpa took on a different role for me, chauffeur. Dragging me home from school or camp, taking me to friends' houses, and being my own personal aftercare, I got to spend extra time with Grandpa every day, and those conversations not only made our bond even stronger, but they have had a lifelong impact on me. In 7th grade, I made the mistake of telling Grandpa that my favorite subject in school was science. Grandpa, still holding out hope that one of his kids or grandkids would be a doctor like him, latched on to that idea. I can honestly say that the reason I am studying engineering today is because of Grandpa's guidance and support. No one has supported my education more, always having lengthy talks about what classes I'm in, asking about my grades, talking with me about the science books he was reading, and setting up lunch dates at California Pizza Kitchen with his engineering friends like Barry Goldberg, who kindly had to explain to Grandpa that his classes that used the slide rule in the 50s don't necessarily apply to a modern engineering education. He helped me along my way, and I worked harder out of my desire not to disappoint him. His love and guidance led me down the path that I am glad to be on today and shaped me into the person I am.
I don't know exactly when it started, but nearly every day off from school, end of winter break, and even when I came back from the Army, Grandpa would call the house phone and in his particular matter-of-fact way, asked if I wanted to go out for lunch. There was really nothing special about Taboon, a perfectly fine kosher Israeli restaurant. But, like with all good traditions, at some point it became our place. We'd sit down in more or less the same spot, order a Yemenite soup, a shawarma, and a Snapple. I'd eat the pickles while he ate the beets. Grandpa would ask me about school and we'd talk politics. He'd usually complain a bit about the synagogue, and every once in a while I'd get lucky and get a story about his childhood, medical school, or even the Air Force or starting the practice. Nothing all that interesting was ever said, but it was just about us being together. When I think of Grandpa, the very first thing that pops into my mind is Taboon, and particularly him trying to back out of their truly tight and poorly designed parking lot. Holding on tight to that ring-beaten steering wheel of his black Lexus, Grandpa is trying his very best. He switches his gaze from mirror to mirror and lets out a whoop and slams on the brake every time he almost hits a car zooming past. Grandpa methodically takes his time and only makes a couple of rash choices on the way. At first glance, this moment would seem meaningless, one of the thousands of tiny, beautiful, and sacred memories I have with my grandfather. But in reality, this small scene encapsulates entirely who Grandpa was to me. There's, of course, Grandpa's love of Judaism and commitment to Zionism. I don't think it was only by chance or because he loved a good cup of soup that he always suggested going to Taboon. All of you know how much his passions inspired my life choices. There's also, of course, the hanging specter of the accident. While he almost never talked about it, it had immense impacts on his life. Not being able to turn his back to look out the rear view window was just a small inconvenience to Grandpa, but only God knows how much pain he was in on a daily basis. But if I'm being perfectly honest, that moment is so special because it happened to that black Lexus. He hated that car from the moment he got it. Too low to the ground and way too sporty for a retiree running errands around Skokie. But Grandpa being Grandpa, he was too stubborn to admit defeat and drove that car until he couldn't drive it anymore. He was going to get his money's worth. I don't know what the future will hold. I know I speak for all the grandkids when I say that I don't know what a Passover Seder will be like without Grandpa sitting there at the head of the table with his big white beanie on, always ready to learn a new interpretation of some age-old text. I don't know what it'll be like to graduate, win some little honor, or have some other ceremony without Grandpa coming over to me after, all hunched over, shaking my hand, telling me he's proud of me, and making sure he gets his shots. And I definitely don't know what it'll be like to walk into Grandma and Grandpa's house and not hear Fox News blaring, and inevitably, the most important question be asked, Gene, what's for lunch? But I do know one thing. No matter what, life will never be the same. Today, all of us are losing more than a man, more than a husband, father, grandfather, great-grandfather, friend, or colleague. We're losing a giant larger than life. He may have been a bit prickly on the outside, but I've never met someone more committed to their loved ones. Never someone more curious, more wise, more genuine. Grandpa Howard was a constant in my life, in all of our lives, like God's pillar of fire who guided the people of Israel in their wanderings in the desert. It may now be harder to see, but I'm confident that Grandpa will continue leading our paths forward. Baruch Dayan Emet, may his memory be a blessing.
As was shared each Friday night, Howard would share with Jean the words of Eshet Chayil. And in honor of their 64 years together, the family chose for us to recite the words of Eshet Chayil together, for which I will read, including Howard's favorite translation. Eshet Chayil mi yimtza v'rachok mibini michra, v'atach ba'ala v'shalo yichsar, g'maltahu tov v'lo ra kol yemei chayeha, Karpar parsa leoni biyadeha shilchala evyon. A good wife who can find her worth is far above rubies. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and nothing shall he lack. She renders him good and not evil all the days of her life. She opens her hand to the needy and extends her hand to the poor. She is robed in strength and dignity and cheerfully faces whatever may come. She opens her mouth with wisdom. Her tongue is guided by kindness. She tends to the affairs of her household and eats not the bread of idleness. Her children come forward and bless her, her husband too, and he praises her. Many women have done superbly, but you'll have surpassed them all. Charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a God-revering woman is much to be praised. Place before her the fruit of her hands. Wherever people gather, her deeds speak her praise. As we grieve this tremendous loss and recognize and celebrate the life and legacy of this cherished soul, we can see clearly that Howard was one of those rare people whom one chances upon only once in a lifetime. As the prophet of old so ably put it, we will not witness the beauty and kindness of such a human being soon again. For Howard was strong, deeply committed to his family, curious, incredibly knowledgeable, generous, charitable, and so significantly caring, but so much more. Proust said, "Let us be grateful to those who make us happy, for they are the charming gardeners who make our souls blossom." We're so grateful to Howard because he made us happy. He made our souls blossom. With his kindness and compassion. And our appreciation for Howard was mirrored by his appreciation, his gratitude, especially for his cherished family, for they made his soul blossom. His college sweetheart, Jean, with whom he shared 64 years and built a life and legacy of love, companionship, honor, and tradition. A life lived in partnership. And Howard's children and their partners, his cherished grandchildren and his great-granddaughter, all of whom are blessed beyond words with their memories that they share, especially as they shared just a moment ago, those Friday night Shabbat dinners and his personal blessings for each of them. He was so proud of all that he did. The last time I visited Howard, even when facing the end of his illness, he beamed with pride for his family, sharing with me their most recent picture of gathering together and the powerful images of their journey from his and Jean's wedding until this moment today, welcoming a great-granddaughter to the world. And it is a tremendous loss for our BHBE community. A longtime member of B'nai Emunah, prior to the joining of the two congregations, he served as VP of Ritual and on committees. We will dearly miss his davening, as Rabbi Kensky shared, leading us in our morning prayers, his participation and wisdom in our adult education classes, and his Torah reading. Perhaps we may feel the sting most this upcoming Yom Kippur, when Howard will not be there to lead us in the book of Jonah, which he would read every year to honor his father's yahrzeit, which fell on Yom Kippur. I will so deeply miss our conversations. Every time we spoke, which was minimally 3 times per week, I learned something new, because he had so much wisdom to offer. And he was always learning something new, gaining expertise in a wide array of subjects. A lifelong learner, Howard was always reading, growing, and adapting to the times and those times' needs. Just 2 weeks ago, Howard taught our adult education class a brilliant rabbinic homily about Jacob and Esau that was totally novel to all of us. We will forever miss his brilliance, presence, and knowledge. Whether it was his brilliance and expertise in medicine or his wisdom of our tradition. There's a story told in the Talmud about the most prolific rabbi of the Talmud, whose name was Rav. When Rav passes away, his students mourn him, and they tear at their clothing as a sign of their loss. Time goes on, and the students begin to heal. But then there's a question they have that they realize only Rav could answer. And that initial sting of loss returns, and they tear their clothing all over again. That aching loss resurfaces. So again and again, whenever there's a question to be answered, a teaching to learn, a blessing to be given on Friday night, the ache will return, and there will be another tear. And even still, we must remember that enduring relentless ache is the sign of Howard's continued presence here in the world, the proof positive that love does not die. That beautiful, terrible ache is the way that his soul reverberates in this world for the rest of our lives and beyond. At our morning minyan, I can still feel Howard's presence. And I think all of us will feel him today and every day. And this dizzying absence is a sacred reminder of his eternal presence. Given Howard's love for the state of Israel, I thought it fitting to share the words of the Israeli folk hero Chana Senesh, who teaches there are stars whose radiance is visible on earth, though they have long been extinct. There are people whose brilliance continues to light the world, even though they are no longer among the living. These lights are particularly bright when the night is dark. They light the way for humankind. Howard lit the way for us. And for that, we are so grateful. He would recite a blessing with his family every Shabbat, with which I'll share. as I conclude my remarks this morning. Harachaman hu yivarech otanu kulanu yachad b'virkat shalom. May the merciful one bless all of us together with the blessing of peace. May Howard's memory be an eternal blessing to his family, his friends, our community, and the entire world. And together we say, Amen. It's now that we rise for our El Maleh memorial prayer, through which we plead with God for Howard's soul to be bound to each and every one of ours for all of eternity.
El Maleh Rachamim, Shochen Bamromim, Amtseh Menucha Nekona, Tachat Kanfei Hashchina, B'malot Kedoshim Utchorim, Kezohar Arakia Mashirim, Et Nishmat Tzvi ben Nasan, Shekalach Leolamo, Began Eden came Menuchato, Ana Bal Harachamim, Astirechu Beseder Kenafecha Leolamim, Utzror Bitzror Kakayim et Nishmato, Adonai hu nachalato, veyanuach beshalom al mishkavo, venomar Amen.
El Maleh Rachamim, exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure, to the soul of our beloved Dr. Howard Rice, who has gone to his eternal home. Merciful one, we ask that our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May his soul be bound up in the bond of life. May he rest in peace, and let us say, Amen.
Friends, this does conclude our service here in the chapel. Interment will take immediately at the family's plot at West Lawn Cemetery in Norwich. The address is 7801 West Montrose. Following the interment, the family will be sitting Shiva at the home in Skokie on Karlov. That information, including all the different Shiva times as well as Minyanim times, are available in the folder that you received on the way in. If you did not receive one, there's more on the table just outside. For those of you who are watching this online, that information is on our website. Please also note the family has asked for memorial contributions to be made in Dr. Rice's memory. That information is available on the folder on the website as well. In keeping with the family's request, there will be no formal procession to the cemetery. We just ask that you drive safely, and for those of you joining us at the cemetery, that will be at 12 o'clock. When you get to the cemetery, please try and if you could face the same direction, just be on one side of the road. There will be gentlemen from the cemetery to help navigate you, but we're going to the carnation section. Okay. The grandchildren have been selected to serve as pallbearers. Rachel Brown, Benjamin Brown, Joel Suarez, Joshua Suarez, Micah Suarez, Asher Rice, and Aviana Rice. At this time, as well as Nicole Brown. At this time, I'm going to ask everybody to please rise as we escort the casket of Dr. Rice, the clergy, and the family from the chapel.